Kia ora, welcome back to part 2 of Momo and why there is a greater threat to our children. And boy, is there a greater threat to our children. So internet pornography. So things have changed a lot in pornography over the years. Pornography's probably been around for thousands of years in one form or another, but the internet has done something, completely different to it. It's kind of changed the whole landscape. And, internet is, it's largely free, it's readily accessible, often it's in your face. Perhaps that's not the most appropriate term to use. And it comes in all different shapes, sizes and colours. Okay, and it's causing massive social problems which nobody's talking about. So you would think that I'm about to kind of condemn pornography and say, don't use pornography and pornography should be banned and all this kind of thing. And probably a lot of people, a lot of my colleagues would probably have that view. I think it's not the existence of pornography that is necessarily the problem. It's certain things about it, including some of which we'll get onto later, including the nature of it. So the nature of it, the availability of it, and the speed of it. We'll get into the speed when we start talking about adult men and the effects that pornography has on adult men. So pornography's never been so freely available and so uncontrolled, if you like, or the access to it has never been so uncontrolled. It used to be, kids occasionally did get access to pornography. They'd stumble upon their father's stash of, porn mags, or they'd find a video somewhere and watch it, or they'd find abandoned, porn magazines in a lay-by somewhere. But, generally speaking, the content was much milder, and you can only get so much in a magazine. If you get online, you can just access anything. You can access any kink, and in some ways I think that's good, because I think there are people that have had unique forms of sexuality that they felt very alone and not being able to express those or indulge those, and have been kind of marginalised and felt like they're kind of bad and dirty. And I think sexuality comes in all different shapes and sizes. So I think in some ways that's not a bad thing. In other ways it's a very bad thing, and we'll get onto that in a short while. So the things I think that are particularly bad about pornography is, for the most part, I think pornography is exploitative, and for the most part, pornography sends really poor messages, particularly about women, because women are the main focus of pornography. There is pornography featuring men, there's gay porn, there's all kinds of things. And I've researched into the making of pornography and some of the horror stories that I've heard. We'll get more into the lack of realism, but the sheer amount of sex that people who are actors in porn movies, if actor is the right term, is really not good for you. It's really dangerous. It causes physical damage. So people that shoot porn films, and also they're frequently getting infections, getting sexually transmitted diseases. They get incredibly sore, and physical damage to the extent that anal sex is very popular in pornography. So the amount of anal sex that's done is actually causing severe damage to the anus and rectum, to the extent that some people that have worked in porn no longer have control of their bowel movements. They're wearing nappies. That's extreme, isn't it? There's things like anal bleaching, so people bleach their anuses to make them nice and kind of fresh and pink looking. Bleach to your anus, sensitive part of the body. It's horrendous stuff. And a lot of where I've learned some of these things is watching interviews with people in the pornography industry, and models have talked about this kind of thing, about the sheer amount of pain often that they're in, and that when they're kind of doing the oohs and the ahs, they're kind of trying to make that look ecstatic, but actually they're in a huge amount of pain. So there's lots of things about porn that aren't nice. I wouldn't go as far as to write off pornography. I think pornography is a release. for a lot of people and serves a useful function. I think the how of pornography, personally, I think that needs to change radically, and the messages that go with pornography and the way pornography is made. But there are lots of people that make their own. There are people with things like Tumblr accounts and stuff like that that produce their own pornography videos off their own volition. You could maybe argue that these people are perhaps just doing it for some psychopathological reason, that they're kind of in some way self-harming or exploiting themselves. And you get couples that produce pornography. And there is a new website which is, or not a website, but a service that's been set up called Make Love Not Porn, which has been set up by people who think that kind of, the erotic, pornography can exist, but it should exist in a much more realistic form and a much more consensual, non-exploitative form. So they do wholesale. So basically, couples send in videos of just of them doing their own thing, and you pay per video. You pay to watch a video. So that's the kind of situation with porn. I think it's a bit like, I suppose I see it in the same way as kind of like gambling, drugs and alcohol. I don't think it should be made legal. I think that would be the worst thing you could ever do, because it would drive it underground. It would become much more criminalised and much more sinister. But I think it's got to change radically, because there is some real nasty stuff in porn. And some of the nasty stuff in porn, for the things like gagging, where the penis is inserted deep into the mouth, to the extent that it's like for the recipient, it's like choking. That's becoming popular. So kind of quite violent, quite aggressive messages being portrayed in pornography. And we'll get more into that side of things a little bit later. We'll probably talk about more with the young adults. When we get into that and the effects that it has. So this is the kind of the context setting, if you like. So what do think about how easy this is being accessed by children, and you might say to yourself, well, I just set limits, and I have all kinds of different clever ways in which I monitor and restrict my child's internet access. Okay, well, that's fantastic, but they go to school and they've got mates with mobile phones and with iPads and with other devices, and they haven't necessarily got the same restrictions. So you can't 100% protect your child unless you kind of contain your child and imprison your child, and that causes other problems. Children do need to go out and see friends. That's really important, especially in this internet age where everything's becoming more virtual. So if you've got a child that wants to go and see friends, consider yourself blessed, because a lot of children just want to play on their Xboxes, and they don't want to go out and play. So you can't wrap them up in cotton wool. I'm all for restrictions and monitoring and all that kind of thing. That's great, really, really good, but that's not enough to protect your child from the easy level of free access to pornography, and not just any pornography, but a whole range of things. Okay, so in my day, when I were a lad, we might find a porn mag, and as guys, we'd all kind of share it around and look at it together, and we'd think that was wonderful. But these days, there's no limitation. You can go from one thing to the other through all these different specialist interests, and then you can get easily into some really quite nasty stuff, often by a progressive route. So that's the kind of the situation. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm seeing the damage on a daily basis, and it's insane and drives me mad that nobody's talking about this stuff. And this is the start of the dialogue. So I'm going to end this video here. I'm going to go into part 3, and we're going to talk more about the effects that it has on children and young people. So Rangi Mario, see you soon.